Good evening everyone for Telesur English. I'm Sarah Begum in Caracas, Venezuela. We start tonight in Costa Rica, where the third CELAC summit ended with statements of solidarity condemning foreign intervention in Venezuela. A number of leaders from Latin America and the Caribbean expressed their support for the Venezuelan government in the face of ongoing destabilization efforts. Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega accused the US government of launching a calculated economic war. He compared the situation to Washington's role in the overthrow of the Chilean president Salvador Allende in 1973. Cuban President Raúl Castro also condemned the US sanctions against Venezuela.
Expresamos enérgica condena a las...
We thoroughly condemn the unacceptable and unjustified unilateral sanctions put on the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela.
impuestas a la República Bolivariana de Venezuela.
Regional tensions between Latin America's right and left also emerged at the summit, with Venezuela's Nicolás Maduro lashing out at the country's opposition and its international allies for trying to provoke a coup.
There's a great provocation against Venezuela from the extreme right, using political figures from some countries linked to the right wing. I need to say it here. Some countries that are linked to the project of the right, a group of politicians that don't recognize our Constitution, that don't recognize our institutions, that don't recognize the legitimate president of our country, who want to see a coup in the short term.
The Bolivian president, Evo Morales, said he would like to see CELAC as an anti-capitalist bloc and made reference to the damage caused by the capitalist economic model.
How beautiful it would be that all the presidents of CELAC were anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. We respect all ideological differences, but it is my wish because capitalism and imperialism do a lot of damage to life and to humanity. They do a lot of damage to Mother Earth. Capitalism is destroying humanity and life, destroying Mother Earth.
The president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, assumed the pro tempore presidency of CELAC and insisted the bloc should work towards its 2015 plans across 5 areas.
These areas should be to reduce extreme poverty, inequalities, science, technology, and education, the environment, financial development, and the potential of our role as a bloc.
And moving on to other Latin American stories, 2 people have been killed and 66 injured in an explosion at a maternity hospital in Mexico City. Emergency workers rushed to the hospital in the upscale Guajimalpa neighborhood after a leak from a gas truck ignited. The explosion destroyed much of the building and rescue services found several babies alive under the rubble. The authorities initially reported 7 deaths, but later corrected the figure to 2. 22 of the injured are in serious condition. Staying in Mexico, the government continues to insist that the 43 missing students were murdered by a drug gang. But parents and supporters remain skeptical. We go to Clayton Con for an update.
In a radio interview on Wednesday, Mexico's Attorney General Jesus Murillo Caram affirmed that the case of the disappeared 43 Ayotzinapa students is not yet closed. His reactions come amid a sharp storm of criticism and negative reactions to the Attorney General's Tuesday announcements that essentially posited that the students were mass executed by members of the crime group in September. Now, families of the students, including experts, human rights defenders, and analysts, balked at the Tuesday declarations, viewing them as the authorities' attempt to abruptly close the case. They say that the investigation has been primarily based on witness testimony and confessions, presumably of 39 of the 99 individuals detained in relation to the events when police attacked and illegally detained the students in the western Mexican state of Guerrero. They say there is a lack of substantial physical and scientific evidence to remove all doubt in the events. They also demand that further lines of investigation be opened, including the role of the Army and federal police in the events. However, Murillo Caram insisted in the Wednesday interview that he ultimately believes that the students were killed. This is Clayton Kahn reporting for Telesur here in Mexico City.
Investigations into the death of Argentinian attorney Alberto Nisman continue to evolve in the capital, Buenos Aires. New evidence has emerged questioning the role that a computer expert for the prosecutor's office, Diego Lagomarsino, played in the death of the attorney. Lagomarsino said he lent his gun to Nisman shortly before he was found dead. Nisman was buried in Buenos Aires early today. Hundreds gathered to pay their final respects. We go to Leo Poblete for more.
Emilio Ruchansky, a journalist following the investigation into Nisman's death closely, has explained to Telesur that it is crucial that the ex-wife of the prosecutor appoint an expert hand to push the case forward.
This point cannot be moved on to yet, because the former wife of Nisman, Dr. Salgado, has to determine whether to set her own investigator, which she surely will, because she is also interested in who has control over that evidence, which is all the proof of the last communications that the prosecutor made, which I think is very important. I think it's very important this information is released and citizens can access it.
Ruchansky also referred to the press conference offered by the only person facing charges at the moment, Diego Lagomarsino, the owner of the gun which appeared alongside Nisman's dead body.
I think Lagomarsino and his lawyer, Maximilio Rusconi, worked on trying to defend the only charge he is facing and for which he has not made a statement. The only statement he has made was as a witness in this case. He has been charged for lending his own firearm to a user who is not the legitimate user of that firearm.
The prosecutor in charge of the investigation, Viviana Fein, is awaiting reports she ordered regarding security camera footage at the apartment complex where Nisman was found dead, to compare the information with the story told by Lagomarsino, which does not coincide with the building's entry and exit records.
No solo de Lagomarsino en particular.
Not only Lagomarsino in particular, but many visits that have been at the Le Parc apartment towers demonstrate irregularities. Therefore, we have to compare entry and exit records, look at the cameras, download all the data from the equipment, and watch the footage.
The results of the last toxicology and laboratory tests carried out on the body of Nisman are expected in the next few days. There is no assurance that they can give new leads into the investigation. From Buenos Aires, Leo Politegoduti, Telesur.
Thanks to Leo. In Peru, civil society organizations are reflecting on the current human rights situation in the country. Rael Mora brings us this report from Lima.
With 30 years of history and close to 80 member organizations, the National Coordination for Human Rights, a coalition of civil society groups, reported on the current situation in the country.
So far, under the government of Ollanta, unfortunately, there have been 46 killed during social conflicts, and there were more than 1,000 injured and several hundred detained or indicted. So what we have seen is that there is a policy of systematic criminalization of social protest.
Other main issues of concern for the country, according to Silva Santisteban, are the exclusion of LGBT people and home care workers' rights from legislation. Germán Vargas, a human rights lawyer, argues that the lack of human rights advancement is because the government refuses to take stock of civil society's demands since the fall of Fujimori's regime in 2000.
No se consolidó en general este proceso de desmontaje.
The movement to dismantle all the damage done by the dictatorship of Alberto Fujimori was not consolidated. We were not able to eliminate it, free ourselves of all of that. That was a great opportunity lost.
Esa fue como una gran oportunidad perdida.
However, Vargas believes that there are some positive steps, with Peruvians much more willing to demand respect for human rights and not just wait for the state to take action. Also, human rights organizations have lauded the approval to permit abortions when the life of a woman is in danger. Reporting from Lima, Peru for Telesur, Rael Mora.
And starting our world news coverage, Greece will seek common ground with its European partners to solve its bailout and debt problems, according to the chairman of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz. After a meeting with the new Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, Schulz said that many in Europe fear Greece will go its own way, but these fears are misled. Schulz was the first senior foreign politician to meet the new government. At the same time, Germany and the EU again warned Greece against reneging on the reforms tied to its international bailout. German Vice-Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel told his parliament that Europe insists the changes in Greece should not be to its detriment. The EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker also said Greece must comply with its commitments to Europe. The Tsipras' government has already rolled back several privatizations and austerity measures. A group of Democratic and Republican lawmakers in Washington has proposed a bill that would end travel restrictions to Cuba for all US citizens and legal residents. Our correspondent Alexandra Hall has more.
In a first show of congressional support for normalizing relations with Cuba, a bipartisan coalition of senators introduced the Freedom to Travel to Cuba Act of 2015, urging Congress and the public to remember sanctions on Cuba are prohibitions on Americans.
We're simply saying that Americans should be allowed to have the right to travel wherever they would like to, unless there's a compelling national security reason.
The announcement came just hours after Cuban President Raúl Castro declared that the United States owes the Cuban people monetary compensation for the suffering caused by 50 years of failed U.S. policy towards Cuba. Some said that's unlikely to happen.
The U.S. is not going to compensate Cuba, it's not going to compensate Russia, it's not going to compensate China or any other country that we have levied sanctions on in the last 80 years.
The measure presented by Democrats and Republicans would also cut restrictions on banking transactions related to travel. Normalizing economic relations is a process that has already begun, but U.S. investment in Cuba is still prohibited.
President Obama has liberalized a number of restrictions to the extent of the executive ability. He's increased the ability of American citizens to travel to Cuba. But in terms of normalizing economic relations, allowing commercial flights, allowing U.S. businesses to invest in Cuba, Helms-Burton would have to be lifted.
By some estimates, full economic participation on both sides could bring in around $6 billion to each country annually. But neither the United States nor Cuba will see a dime as long as the embargo persists. Alexandra Hall, Telesur, Washington.
Representatives of the Syrian government and opposition figures have ended a two-day round of talks in Moscow without any concrete result, except an agreement to meet again.
There will be no immediate final results because it was an initial consultative meeting. The government delegation has agreed on a set of points titled the Moscow Principles.
Russia has increased its efforts to resolve disagreements that are blocking a possible solution to Syria's three-year conflict. We turn to Nashwan Abdullah for the report.
The consultative meeting between the government and opposition representatives underway in Moscow ended Thursday. The latest meeting included two sessions which addressed mutual principles including Syrians' sovereignty and unity, fighting terrorism, opposing external intervention, and keeping the Syrian army. According to a Russian official, the opposition blocs have presented their points separately. Another meeting is predicted for the next month in Moscow. However, some note how these efforts are being undermined by US allies in the Middle East and elsewhere that continue to aid terrorist groups in Syria. Nashwan Abdullah, Telesur, Damascus, Syria.
The government anti-Islam movement Pegida is looking ever more in disarray after 5 more leading members resigned. The latest split comes just a day after Catherine Oratel became the second leader of the movement to resign in just 1 week. The group also cancelled its next rally after learning that its founder was facing prosecution for inciting hatred. The movement emerged late last year in Dresden. Palestinians in the Gaza Strip have been protesting against a decision by the United Nations to stop funding the rebuilding of homes damaged during Israel's offensive last year. Noor Harazin has the details.
Palestinians took to the streets late Wednesday to protest a United Nations announcement that it could no longer continue funding home repairs in Gaza, where after a 50-day indiscriminate attack, Israeli forces caused damages to about 90,000 buildings. Palestinian families in Gaza Strip were angered by the announcement and attacked the organization's facilities in the coastal enclave, condemning the decision to cut funding. They also chanted against the UN agency and called on donor countries to deliver on their promises to help rebuild the besieged enclave. On Tuesday, the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees said donor countries had failed to come through with their pledges to help rebuild Gaza. Israel caused close to $5 billion in damages in the Palestinian enclave last summer. Robert Seri, who was the United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East process, expressed his outrage caused by the assault on UN buildings in Gaza by protesters. He also said he was deeply concerned that security forces in Gaza did not intervene immediately. Nur Harazin, Telesu TV, Gaza.
The Chinese artist Liu Bolin, known as the Invisible Man for using painted-on camouflage, has held performances in Mexico. His exhibition is a symbol of silent protest. The Chinese artist was made up to become invisible in front of over 400 Mexican masks. Bolin said that making himself invisible is a very straightforward and fast way to express his feelings. His art uses his body to question the conflict between human beings and the things they create. A lab in Argentina has developed the first orthopedic arm in Latin America that uses sensors to respond to nerve impulses. The arm is accompanied by a glove that allows the user to carry out their regular daily activities. The prosthetic limb detects the electric signals generated by the muscle movements. These are then sent to a microcontroller, which in turn relays them to a motor that brings the hand to life. It will soon be widely available to purchase. More on these and other stories on our website, telesortv.net/English. For Telesor English, I'm Sarah Begum. Have a good night.